So today we got a question from Mike, and Mike says he's curious if there's a way for him to determine whether or not his head and arm choke is a choke or if it's a neck crank. And so he said that what's happening in his gym is right now he's working on his head and arm choke, right, where you're in this sort of side mount position and you're off to the side and you're finishing the choke. Well, he's working on it, but he says sometimes it's a choke and everything works great, the person taps, and then in other cases it is a crank, the person doesn't tap, they escape, and in some cases they'll even complain about, hey man, you're cranking my neck. And so he's wondering, is there a way to figure out which one it is, on the fly, or to figure out a way to make sure that it's a choke and not a neck crank? So brother, thank you for the question. It's very, very simple. It'll require a couple things. One, you'll have to have good training partners that you can use for this situation. And then you'll also have to be very intuitive with your body and really be conscious of what your body feels like at a certain moment. So let me explain. Number one, with your training partners, let's say you've got one of your training partners in a choke. If it's not tapping them after, say, like 3 to 5 seconds, right? Like where you get that point where you're holding it, and normally people would tap out by now if it was a choke. If they're not tapping, what you need to do is loosen up just a little bit and say, hey, bro, is this a choke or is this a crank? And they can let you know. Now you don't have to let them escape, but you just let up a little bit to make sure that if it is choking them, that they don't go out in that process. So you loosen up a little bit, and they'll let you know, and it's choking me or it's cranking my neck, whatever, and they'll let you know. Now that's the second part. That's the first part. Now the second part to it is you then have to say, okay, what does that feel like? Now that seems very silly, right? What does it feel like? But that's really, really important, because a lot of times when you watch a high-level grappler do their technique, let's say maybe they're really good at guillotines, okay? You watch a high-level grappler go for the guillotine and it looks like it's there, but then they let go of it for some reason. Well, in a lot of cases, they knew that it wasn't right. It didn't feel right, and they know that. And that's a lot of times what you go off of, the better and better you get, because as you're drilling these techniques and these movements over and over and over again, you develop that muscle memory. You don't have to think about like if you're doing an arm bar. In the beginning, I remember being a white belt, and I had to think about all the different steps. Thumb pointed up, wrist control, pinching the knees, clamping the heels down, all these different steps to make sure that one arm bar is correct, right? Well, eventually all those steps become a muscle memory that's packaged together, and it's just armbar. And I know whether or not that armbar is there because I can feel it. If I get someone in a rear naked choke, I know if it's there because I can feel it. And if I've got a pretty good arm triangle choke too. And again, I know whether or not my arm is placed and my shoulder's placed just correct to make sure that it's a choke. And I know what that feels like. And so in your situation, what I imagine is happening is what you need to do, or what I would recommend you to do rather, is to get your best training partners for this sort of stuff. And again, if you get them in something that you're practicing and it's not getting that tap like you think it should, ask them, is this working? Is this going to happen? And if your training partner is like grunting and like gritting their teeth, you're probably in the right track. But if you let go a little bit and they just say, no, man, it's just cranking my neck a little bit, then you need to think about what that feels like, and you don't want it to feel that way. And you need to adjust and make it into a choke. And again, how to adjust, that's a different story. And that's something that you might want to ask your coach to kind of give you a tweak on as far as your positioning. But as far as finding the right feeling, once you find the feeling of the choke versus the crank from asking your training partners, then you'll know whether or not to hold the choke or to let go of the crank because you don't want to crank their necks. So hopefully that's helpful to you, Mike. And guys, I'll talk to you next time.